The weekly fireside chat. I'm hanging out here in one of our offices. This is normally Tracy's office, but we've worked in it together many times, and I actually like shooting from here, so this is where I'm at. It's October 11th, 2020. Again, I'm happy to be here with you. And I have an interesting theme that I want to go over with you this week. But first, I'm going to open by just a little bit of a quick review of my interview earlier this week that I did with James Fox, a filmmaker who did the movie The Phenomenon, which I think a lot of you have seen. It's on my YouTube channel, and I've got it linked here on this side as well. And that was a good interview. James, along with producer Tracy Torme, who actually worked with him on this. Tracy Torme, by the way, was the filmmaker who did the movie Fire in the Sky years ago with Travis Walton. But anyway, they did a very fine movie, and I was very glad to interview James about it. If you haven't seen that interview, by all means, do check it out. The thing that I wanted to lead with was the very last thing that James and I talked about in that interview. And this, by the way, is something that I am going to clip out and just re-upload as a separate YouTube video because I think it's that interesting. And that's his Chuck Clark story. And basically, I would encourage you just to go to the end of the interview and listen for it. But James talked about a UFO video that he saw years ago, like 20 some odd years ago, through a gentleman named Chuck Clark, who had gotten this old VHS video from two young guys who'd had an incredible UFO experience out in Nevada. There's a lot of interesting UFO experiences people had, but what they had was potentially the single best UFO video ever recorded. This is a funny thing because James actually told this story to Tracy and me and a group of RD members when we were at a conference. I think that was out in for the International UFO Congress about a year ago. Heck of a story. He retold it for this interview. And long story short, these two young guys, this really seemed totally authentic to James. They were doing a kind of road trip. It almost seemed like a Blair Witch Project kind of a thing where he describes like the early part of the video is just them goofing around out in Nevada at the Little Alien, I'm thinking, or the Black Mailbox or whatever, the various sightseeing places in Nevada. And then they have a genuine UFO experience. And according to James, the way that the whole thing was filmed, it seemed absolutely, totally legitimate. He always regretted that he never got a copy of that video because sometime later he tried to connect with Chuck Clark and learned from Chuck, who wouldn't talk, but Chuck just said, I don't have that anymore. I don't have that video. It's gone. And then learned from George Knapp that Chuck Clark's home had been raided by federal agents and that video was gone. It was an unbelievable story. So, yeah, I do recommend you go check out the details of that story. I am going to clip that thing and I'm going to make that a separate video. But I wanted to lead with that because, when you think about these types of sightings. So the quality of the video apparently was extraordinary, but the sighting itself, I'm absolutely certain there are many of you watching this, and this is only for our website. This is not going out to the larger global community, but I'm sure there's many of you who've had UFO encounters that were as dramatic as what these young guys had. Because the fact is that ultra dramatic sightings happen. They don't happen every day to everyone, but they happen often enough that we know this is a very significant phenomenon. And, it just prompted me to think and to ask myself, these beings who are operating these craft are everywhere. And I've asked this here before, I'm just going to say it again. What are they doing when we see them? Why are they flying around? When we see them, where are they coming from? Where are they going to? There's a couple of basic theories. As I've often come back to Dave Jacobs, I do this because, not because I think he's always right, but because of most UFO researchers that I am familiar with, David has always had the ability to have a comprehensive analysis of things in a way that that kind of makes sense. It doesn't mean that everything he has is complete or that it's even always right, but he's had a history of developing very workable theories about what is going on. So in David's case, his theory is, look, when you are looking at these craft, they are doing one and only one thing. They are abduction. They're an abducting civilization that is taking people and they are bringing them aboard craft, and they are performing scientific / medical procedures to create hybrid races, or a hybrid race that increasingly is going to look like human beings. They're hybrids that they are using to infiltrate society and to engage in the program of planetary takeover. So David has a very comprehensive theory about this. So anytime he argues that you see these craft, that is what they are engaged in doing. So I think about that, and I do find merit to this theory. The big problem that I've always had with that formulation is not that it's wrong necessarily, but that I think it's probably incomplete. I've come to believe that there are definitely multiple groups that are operating these types of craft. And I do believe that there are multiple agendas. And in fact, I think David believes that too. In fact, when I recall asking him about this on more than one occasion, and his answer was always, well, yeah, there probably are multiple agendas, but I don't care about the other agendas. I only care, he says, about the agenda of the Greys / Insectolin group that is creating hybrids that are engaged in planetary takeover, because they're the only ones that really we have to be taking action against. Okay, so fair enough. I'm going to come back to that. I know this is a very important issue, but that's not my main topic for this video. So what I have been doing in the last couple of weeks is, I've talked a number of times about preparing a booklet. It's actually becoming a larger and larger booklet of the alien agendas. And this is based on the lecture I gave last June 6th that I know a number of you did see. I'm turning it into a written piece of literature, of research. And, it occurred to me when I was doing this that I had some pretty good ideas that are in there that I'm continuing to work with, but there was a lot of areas where I needed to add a great amount of information. So for the last month, I've been going back through a whole array of contact literature. Not all contactee literature, but abduction / encounters / contact types of literature, basically encounters that people have had with these other beings. And going through it and really trying in an organized way to take proper notes, to put this together in a way that I can work with, that then I can write down in a way for you. So that's what I've been doing, and I'm quite happy with how that's gone. And I think I'm very much in the home stretch of this whole project, and I just want to publish this book now. So, but anyway, one thing that I've been reading and just going through these witness accounts is realizing that these craft, at least some of them, may very well have the ability not just to move people through solid objects. I mean, you hear about this frequently enough. Gray aliens going through solid walls or going through the ceiling, and people being floated through solid objects as well. I'm sure all of you or most of you are familiar with these types of claims. And they come across, remember the first time that I would encounter these, which was years ago, I thought that seems a little out there. It doesn't actually seem that out there to me anymore. I don't know what the science of that would actually be, but I can speculate that this is actually not impossible. But be that as it may, there's also claims in some of these witness accounts of the craft themselves going through solid material, such as the ground, such as like granite, and ending up in large cavernous underground facilities. And I read several of these accounts in the last couple of weeks, and it really got me thinking. So I wonder if that's true. Can that be true? And I suppose the answer is, yeah, it can be true. If it's true, like, think about how convenient that would be for any alien or visiting or invading species. Where would you hide? Well, you don't even need a tunnel system necessarily, right? You go through solid rock. You know where there's a nice opening where you can create your own little underground town or city. Now, getting a breathable atmosphere in there might be a challenge for all I know, but hell, if they can go through solid material, maybe they can create a breathable, excuse me, I have an itch on my back, ouch, a breathable atmosphere. I don't know. And, I understand, like, this is maybe some wild speculation. However, there are a number of witness accounts that claim this, that through solid material are underground, very spacious and well-designed spaces for these alien beings. So if that's true, like, that means that these guys could be impervious to any kind of, like, detection technology that the rest of the world would have. I mean, any kind of, like, the HAARP, the High Altitude Auroral Research Project, I think that's what it stands for, which is has technologies like ground penetrating tomography to go into the ground to look for openings and things like that, to find oil, petroleum deposits, but also to find underground bunkers and caves. Like, they actually explicitly are designed for that. But can they really go through solid granite or solid, deep? How deep can they go? It's quite possible that these beings may have total immunity or security from that, especially if they've got a base under the ocean floor. We do know, of course, that there's lots of USO sightings. There's a tremendous amount of ocean-based unknown activity that's going on there, anomalous activity. So I could easily see there might be the ability to go below even the ocean floor into a secure underground facility that they can power with whatever energy. If they breathe oxygen, whatever they breathe, get it in there, would be totally secure. They would be utterly impervious to human prying eyes. Or if they want to go into the interior of a mountain in the Pyrenees or in the Rockies or up in Alaska or wherever. So with the ability to go through solid material, a lot becomes much, much more easy for them. Just a thought. So they, and what they do in their society, I think we have to call it a society, that's a whole other thing. In my Alien Agenda lecture from June, I talked about a variety of alien types. I spent a lot of time talking about human-looking aliens, and to me, that's become a very, very interesting theme indeed. This, by the way, I think is where Jacob's hybrid thesis becomes a bit weak, because anytime you go through the long history of UFO encounters, you find completely human-looking occupants going back many, many, many years, like back into the 50s and 40s and even earlier. There's a number of, I think, pretty good, reasonably well-told and reliable accounts that talk about landed craft in the 30s and even in the 1920s, of totally human-looking occupants. And I'm at the point where I'm inclined to agree with them. In fact, go even further back, even forgetting the airship sightings of the 1890s, there actually are quite a large number of UFO, let's call them airship sightings of the early 20th century, with totally human-looking occupants and pilots. I don't know what to think about all of them, but a number of these sightings are really, really intriguing. Go back to New Zealand in 1909, 1910, and when you go into the details of that wave of sightings there, it just makes, I don't see how to dismiss those. Okay, so anyway, I'm babbling. I'm kind of bouncing around here a little bit too much. Anyway, in the lecture I gave in June, I talked about a couple of fundamental types of beings. The ones that I've been looking at for the last few weeks are really three types. You got tall grays, short grays, and various versions of human-looking beings. There are definitely enough sightings of reptilian and mantid type beings. We don't want to lose them in the mix. But definitely lots of tall grays, even more short grays. They're clearly working together. And then you've got human-looking beings. And it occurs to me that there's two fundamental groups of human-looking beings. So you've got the human-looking beings who are frequently seen with grays. This happens a lot. So people will be on a craft. They'll see either a tall gray or short grays, or both types. Tall grays are always the ones who are really running the show. Generally speaking, they're the brains of the outfit, like we used to say in the gangster days of the 30s. They're the ones who are basically doing the communication with the abductees for the most part. But there are, as often as not, there are humans who are seen there. And those humans inevitably do not seem like human military types. They seem like humans who live with these beings. And those humans often are of a variety of ethnic types. They're often of a variety even of physiological features. Like sometimes the humans will have different shaped eyes and so forth. So you can work on the assumption that they're some kind of hybrid type or some kind of genetically enhanced type of human. So then you get other types of human occupants. Sometimes there are humans who are seen in conjunction with reptilian beings. And I've encountered a few of these stories, again, more recently. Those types of humans, more often than not, seem like they are part of our society, like military collaborators. And there's enough of those stories that make me think that that's going to be my hypothesis here. And actually, I should say there is a third kind of human occupant of the craft. And these are instances in which you have humans seen alone. They're not seen with grays. They're just by themselves. And in those cases, you can speculate they're either a separate entity altogether, a separate group, or they're somehow working with the grays, but the grays aren't with them on this excursion. Could be something like that. And I don't know the answer to that one. Those humans sometimes seem very similar to the humans that you read about in connection with the grays. So maybe that's what it is. It's interesting to think about this, and there's a lot I don't know about this. But what's become clear is how massive all of that reality is. It's a huge underbelly of our existence. And all of us who've studied the UFO subject for any length of time realize that there's this massive world that goes unremarked upon, well, pretty much every day. When we are looking at the UFO subject these days in the public realm, we are constantly coming back to the public revelations, U.S. Navy, whatever new information is coming up with TTSA. James Fox's movie has, features people like Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo and the folks at TTSA, and Leslie Kane's in there. So there's this whole element is very much part of our public conversation these days on UFOs. And what are they talking about? Well, they're certainly not talking about what I've just been bringing up here. They're talking about, wow, the Navy is encountering these craft and we just don't know what these things are. What is this Tic Tac UFO? We don't know. And they throw up their hands and it's like one big mystery. That's where we're at. As I've been saying all along, we're not even really at the point where we're having an honest discussion on something as basic as crash retrievals of UFOs. And damn it, those things have been happening for decades and decades, generations. And we're like getting there. We're getting to the point where we're almost kind of sort of a little bit, maybe in the future, able to talk about crash retrievals a little bit. the last New York Times piece on this from July 23rd tossed out a little bit of a hint. It's true. They took that conversation closer probably than we have been in the past. I'm talking here purely mainstream establishment controlled media, but they did move us closer to that discussion. It's true, but we're still not having that discussion, right? There's still no admission by any authoritative source. That's a word I've come to hate, by the way, authoritative. But we don't have that conversation. And now it's been 3 months since that article. And as you've probably noticed, we haven't moved 1 inch closer down the road toward having this public conversation of crash retrievals of UFOs. And that's even that is only just scratching the surface. Earlier this week, I received a phone call from a pretty well-known person in the UFO field who's done some very, very fine work. I just want to leave it at that. I don't want this person to be, they don't need to have their name out there right now. But this is someone who I have a lot of respect for. And I just got the call out of the blue. We had a nice, maybe hour-long phone conversation. And this individual was, had some optimism, I guess, about disclosure and how things have moved in the last 3 years toward that. And I guess I countered that to some extent by bringing up what I've just told you here, this whole baby steps phenomenon. I mean, we're just starting to take some baby steps. The analogy that I can best employ here would be, think about, let's say you just bought a mansion on the market. It's got like 25 rooms and it's, but for you to inhabit it, you have to clean it out, and it's filled with every room is filled with crap and junk and debris, and it needs, the floors are busted up and the walls are broken and there's no electricity yet. And this is a fixer-upper, like the greatest fixer-upper project you'll ever have. And the thing is, you can't even get into the house because the front porch is filled with junk, like big, heavy, old bathtubs and, all kinds of other debris. And you've got to move it out of the way. And you can't even get to the front porch because the steps leading to the porch are completely filled with debris. So that's our UFO phenomenon, all of that whole thing. So you get to it and you go into the front steps and it's going to take you even a week just to go through the front steps, right? Why a week? I don't know, just because that's what I'm saying. It's going to take you a week or maybe several weeks. You're going to clear everything off. And meanwhile, your cell phone's blowing up. You got to answer your phone calls and you got to take interruptions and your neighbors are talking to you. And then the police come by and they're like, what are you doing here? Do you own this house? And you have to prove to them that you're the owner of the house and you can do all this. The police would be like my analogy for, the establishment trying to stop this whole process from going. But anyway, so you clear off the steps and now you're on the porch and you still can't get to the front door. And that's going to take you another couple of months. And then once you get into the house itself, you have 25 rooms that have to be cleared out before you get to the back room where all of the important stuff is that you want to get to. And it's just going to take you years and years and years. And you actually may die before you get to the back of that house. That's what I'm talking about. And, we're at the point in all of this UFO phenomenon where maybe we've just cleaned off the front steps leading to the porch. Maybe that's where we're at. We have such a long way to go. And all right, so that maybe you think that's a weak analogy, or maybe you think that's a cool analogy. But I think it's actually a pretty good analogy. So let's leave that analogy aside for a moment and now go back to the reality of what I'm talking about. We are at a point where we have just sort of acknowledged that there is a reality to this phenomenon. And I say sort of. It is important, yes, that the United States Navy has made the admissions that they have made. But I will remind everyone that we actually have not even yet had an official statement from the head of the from the U.S. Navy Secretary. Like, we have not gotten that. That has not been, in other words, the head of the Navy has not made this official statement. So we're not even at the point of official disclosure. To say nothing of the head of the Department of Defense, to say nothing of the Office of the President of the United States. So we're not there. It's actually possible, even now, for those admissions to be walked back. It would be difficult, admittedly, to walk back those admissions, but not impossible. And I think if you think this through as well, you will agree. Not impossible. A new direction, a new leadership within the Navy or in the DoD or in the White House could easily say, those people are so full of it, they have no idea of the classified top secret stuff that we're working on, whatever. They could easily do that. And you and I might not find it credible, but we're not in a world anymore where we have an open or free media. Like that doesn't exist. There used to be something like YouTube, and there used to be the web, but even as everyone can see, every single day, it seems, certainly every week, the authoritarianism and the control becomes more and more brazen in our world. And so I could easily see a genuine walking back, even now, of the claims that have been made, because there has not been an official U.S. Navy declaration. I mean, it's been close. Like, you've had Navy spokespersons who have acknowledged that there are UAPs. So there is that. But that's a spokesperson. That's not the head of the Navy. As I say, it would be difficult, but I don't think impossible, because frankly, we're not in an era where consistency is really even being demanded anymore, or where we have a press establishment that has even the slightest bit of ability of thinking independently. I mean, most of the people in the press really aren't that intelligent, frankly, but they certainly don't have an ability to think and much less to act and work independently. So no, it could all be walked back. The thing is, this cover-up is so deep, and it implicates the deepest structure of power in our world, that I really wonder, like, what are the conditions that will have to be necessary to shake this secret loose and get we as a society, us as a people, to the truth? Well, I've been thinking about this for 20 years. Like, what are the conditions that lead to disclosures? I say disclosures plural because over the course of history, there have been openings in the course of UFO secrecy that have occurred, that have broken through different layers of secrecy. It's happened, you know. For example, when I developed a theory years and years ago that political crises within a society have at times led to greater openness within those societies on the matter of UFOs. It's not that a crisis, like the main purpose of the crisis is to open matters up on UFOs, but the UFO openness is one subsidiary result of a societal crisis. So maybe in American history, the most famous one up until now might have been Watergate. As a result of the Vietnam War, you got Watergate, and you have this political crisis. President Nixon resigns, and as a result of that, and actually during that crisis, was a great strengthening of the Freedom of Information Act, which actually happened in 1974. I think it was right before Nixon left. But then, as a result of that whole crisis, during particularly the presidency of Jimmy Carter, there was a mood in the U.S. that was perhaps unique in all of American history. And it was a reaction within the Congress, among certain members of the Congress anyway, to react against the intelligence community, react against the old power structure. And this is when you get the intelligence community hearings and so forth. And it was during that period of time, the presidency of Jimmy Carter, that we really, through Freedom of Information particularly, got a hell of a lot of UFO data out, thousands and thousands of pages of documents. So all of that was as a result of a massive, epic political crisis that happened in this country. But it wasn't simply in the US. It happened in many other nations. When Mao Zedong died in China back in 1976, as a result of that, of course, China had its own political reaction against that under Deng Xiaoping, and Chinese society did actually open to a much greater extent than it had under Mao. And one of the results of that was actually a great amount of UFO information about what had been going on in China. The late researcher Paul Dong wrote some excellent books on Chinese UFO sightings of that period of time because he got access to some of those reports and was able to publish them. In Spain, after the dictator Francisco Franco died in 1975, I believe that was, same thing. There was, he had had a dictatorship that had lasted for many decades, and in the aftermath of that, a number of Spanish UFO cases were released. It was quite interesting. In Russia, the Soviet Union, when that nation collapsed in the late 1980s, early 90s, same thing. KGB UFO files were released. In fact, George Knapp, who I just mentioned a little while ago, he was one of the people to go out and get access to some of those KGB files that we should learn about. And the reason those files came out is because it's like when the ship is sinking, the rafts will jump off, and some of the information that jumps off is UFO related. I think that's really what happens. Like when a society goes through a significant enough of a crisis, things that were impossible become possible. And one of those things is a release of UFO data. It has happened in the past. It hasn't always happened. Not every single society in crisis has, ended up opening up their UFO data. That hasn't always happened, but it has sometimes happened. And to me, that makes sense because the subject is embedded in so much classified secrecy that it seems to me pretty much impossible for legal reform measures to be up to the job of opening this up. And when you look at the situation within the United States, the UFO secrecy, I think this is absolutely the case. The Eric Davis notes on his interview with Admiral Thomas Wilson is a very good case in point, where when you study within those notes, this is something I've talked about a lot, and a number of other people have talked very, very with a lot of wisdom on this. The secrecy is clearly, deeply embedded beyond federal authority, or beyond, let's put it this way, not so much federal authority necessarily as federal operational control. You've got these special access programs that are protected, legally protected within the U.S. governmental structure. And from what I have come to understand, it's within three basic U.S. government departments. The Pentagon, which is what the Wilson notes really focus on, but also the CIA and also the Department of Energy. There may be others, but the Pentagon covers a lot. The Pentagon covers the NRO and the NSA. And then there's the CIA, which this is what I have been led to understand, and I think that's probably true, that they have their own deep cover for UFO activity. And then the DOE, which, as I've come to understand this, probably has the most profound levels of secrecy of all. If you can even believe that, that's incredible to me. But the point is that through those three entry points into the world of special access programs and privatization, like those organizations are essentially provide a huge shield, almost an impenetrable shield, whereby those private agencies, those corporate contractors basically, are able to study this phenomenon with basically an infinite amount of money and complete security and privacy. And I think when you really, look at the Wilson notes, that is one of the main takeaways that you get out of it. And so that's a structure, a level of secrecy that now in theory, a series of presidential executive orders might be able to deal with that effectively. Then if that's the case, then you have to ask yourself, well, why hasn't there been an executive order up till now? We've had 70 years of this secrecy. Clearly, there have been presidents in their retirement who expressed some dissatisfaction with the military industrial complex and establishment. I mean, Truman and Eisenhower are quite obvious about that. Kennedy, during his presidency, was obviously at war with important elements of that same complex, and they obviously took him out. LBJ was not at war with him. He was their tool, and they worked hand in glove. Nixon definitely had some real opposition with the intelligence community. He was not on good terms with J. Edgar Hoover. He was not on good terms with the CIA. Nixon fired his director of the CIA when he got reelected in 1972. That was Richard Helms. Gave Helms 1 month to clean out his desk. That's a whole interesting story. But Nixon got, I think you could really argue, Nixon got taken out in a kind of deep state coup. And don't get me wrong, I'm not some big fan of Richard Nixon. But when you look at the machinations going on behind the scenes, that is what it looks like to me. And in his place was Gerald Ford, who, like LBJ, was the ultimate team player for that deep state establishment. Very likely with Ford, he gave Nixon the pardon, basically just shut Nixon the hell up and to put this whole thing to bed, and then it would be business as usual. Jimmy Carter, as much as some people may like Jimmy Carter was really no different from LBJ and from Ford in the sense that he was a complete tool of that establishment. I mean, David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski basically lifted Carter up out of Georgia and dropped him into the White House. So that was Jimmy Carter. Carter was interesting because he was the first presidential candidate ever to run to say, yeah, I saw a UFO and I don't know what the hell that thing was. And then when pressed on the matter, was essentially forced to say, well, yeah, we'll let out whatever we need to release as long as it doesn't affect national security. That was his great proviso. But then what happened when Carter became president? What happened was there was a significant movement within the United Nations under the leader of Grenada, Sir Eric Gary, to make the United Nations a vehicle for UFO disclosure. Gary actually met with Jimmy Carter in the fall of 1977, and it was not a successful meeting for Eric Gary. I wrote about this in volume 2 of UFOs in a National Security State, by the way, and you can go check it out. I did what I thought was a pretty decent summary of that whole process. Point being this: Jimmy Carter was no friend of UFO disclosure, other than the fact that he did liberalize Freedom of Information Act laws. He did do that, and for that, UFO research does owe him some gratitude. But Carter was never, ever going to go any further than he went with that. So after Carter, you get Reagan, you get Bush Sr., and, neither of those guys was ever in a position to go against the military-industrial complex. I mean, Reagan was really supposed to have been taken out. That's obvious to me by Hinckley, who, by the way, was a very close friend of the Bush family. The Hinckleys and the Bushes were like that. To me, that's extremely obvious that the cabal, let's call them that, wanted Reagan gone. They wanted their man Bush in there. Reagan survived, but Reagan was essentially not a threat to them. In fact, he was really their best buddy. Reagan could sell ice to Eskimos, and he was able to really get the U.S. military complex back in a really nice groove. Of course, I don't think Reagan was going to issue any executive orders. He was fascinated by UFOs. He was a very possible abductee, in my opinion. And, talked about the hypothetical alien invasion and all of that. But no, he was no enemy to the elite. By the way, the abductee part, I remember I had a long conversation once in my life with the actress Shirley MacLaine. I did a podcast for her many, many years ago and chatted with her after the podcast. And she told me this story. It was the rumor mill in Hollywood where the Reagans were very late to a party on one occasion, showing up ashen and upset, and apparently missing a couple of hours of time, and having claimed to see some kind of landed craft off the side of the road. True story from Shirley. Well, true in that Shirley MacLaine told me that. So I don't know if it's actually true, but anyway, wouldn't shock me. It'd be very interesting, wouldn't it? Reagan, of course, was a confirmed UFO witness while he was governor of California in 1974. I wrote about that in Volume 2 of National Security State also. Hell of a sighting. Way better than the Jimmy Carter sighting from 1979. Anyway, Reagan and Bush were not going to fight the deep state on this. No way. And nor was Bill Clinton ever going to do such a thing. Bill Clinton was a Bilderberg attendee in 1992. That's like in Goodfellas when you become a made man. They brought Clinton to the meeting and was like, okay, you're going to be in next, son. And so, no, that was not going to happen. Despite the fact that I think Bill Clinton did and does probably have a genuine interest in the UFO subject. I think that is true. A lot of good reasons to believe that, but no, absolutely not. So after Clinton, you get what? Then you get W. I don't know what George W. Bush really ever thought privately about UFOs, and I don't know if it matters because there's no way in hell that man was ever going to oppose the deep establishment. And same with Barack Obama. I mean, absolutely no way. Obama is the ultimate tool of Wall Street and the deep state. So really, every president since Kennedy, with the possible exception of Nixon, was never going to sign an executive order to liberate UFO secrecy. Just not going to happen. So then you get Trump. And, Trump, honestly, love this man or hate this man, is, I think, maybe the single most interesting U.S. president we have had in generations. I mean, it's fascinating to look at Trump and all of the massive contradictions that he embodies, but in particular, looking at his relationship to the establishment. And the only two presidents in my lifetime that he can be compared to are Nixon and Kennedy, in the sense that they are the only two presidents of the last 60 or even 80 years, from Truman onward, who were clearly outside. Well, Truman and Eisenhower, particularly Eisenhower, I think you could say I at times had some misgivings about the establishment he was working for, but not really that many. And his last, farewell speech was basically a too little, too late. So really, Kennedy, Nixon, and Trump are arguably, you could say, the only three U.S. presidents at least in my lifetime, I was born during the Kennedy administration, that could be seen as potential enemies of the deep state establishment. Yeah, I think that's right. So in the case of Trump, could he sign such an executive order? And I guess, the man is unpredictable enough that you could, even now, you might think maybe he'll do it. But the fact is he hasn't done it. And it's been almost 4 years. The man hasn't done it. Why hasn't it happened? Well, that's a good question. Maybe he's not able to. Maybe what seems like an easy legal solution is not necessarily such an easy solution. There may be things going on behind the scene that I can't really see, but I can assume it hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened for a reason. And obviously, if Trump is voted out in this coming election, there's no way in hell that there would be an executive order coming out of the White House under a Biden president. Sorry, I mean, you may like Biden, I get that, fine, but there's no way in hell that man's going to sign an executive order to liberate UFO secrecy. There's no reason to believe that whatsoever. So anyway, going back to, can a coming crisis jar UFO secrecy loose? And let's really think about that. I've been going over this little theory that I sort of had about political crises opening up secrets. And yes, it is absolutely possible. What crisis are we talking about? Well, guess what I'm not talking about? I'm not talking about the election as the crisis. And that's what everyone, I think, is thinking about. Like, we have an election in a couple of weeks, and yes, no question about it, that is going to be a crisis. But that's not the crisis. And sorry to be the bearer of bad news here, but the political crisis is going to happen as a result of the election, no matter who wins. That's going to be bad. And I actually am very nervous about living in this city during such a time, because guess what? When we were having the George Floyd riots, 3 houses from where I'm sitting is the corner Walgreens store, which, as I think I've mentioned before, was not once but twice looted on two separate occasions, with the windows shot out, like by guns, where people went in and just robbed the place. Walgreens, the neighborhood convenience store. So that's with the George Floyd thing. Does anyone doubt that the potential is vastly worse with this election? I certainly don't doubt it. Anyway, that's not the crisis. That is not the crisis. The crisis is going to be far worse. The crisis is the potential evaporation of the US dollar sometime in the course of the year 2021. And look, I sure as hell hope I'm wrong here. And I'm not an economist. I'm not a financial expert. But one thing I do is I read economists, and I try to read and understand financial experts. And sometimes I don't succeed when I read those, because I will absolutely admit to you that analyses can, at a certain level, they go over my head, because it's really not my expertise. However, there is a growing consensus among very smart financial experts that the trillions more dollars that have just been conjured up out of thin air to meet the COVID crisis, and this is a fully bipartisan effort, by the way. I mean, we already, we doubled our debt under the Obama years from, I think, like, $13, $14 trillion to like $28 trillion or whatever it was, 30 trillion. So that was an unbelievable body blow. Really, there's a 2008 financial crisis that precipitated this whole thing. We're still living in the aftermath of that crisis. But then comes COVID, and we take that, and we've just gone even more. All the debt, people think, oh, just like print money, just create liquidity. Look, here's the thing. On a limited basis, that actually can inject some life into an economy. But when you do it to the extent that we've done it now, we've just hit I was just reading this, we've just hit a point where the deficit not the debt. The deficit is now, that's just an annual thing. That's greater than all of the tax revenue that is coming in. So all the tax revenue that we're getting is not able to match the deficit. I think that's a first. But the debt itself, debt doesn't just happen there. It's not that there are no repercussions to debt. There are absolutely repercussions to debt. Give you a perfect example. When Britain fought the Second World War, you know, that was expensive for Britain, and it really ended up wrecking the British Empire, as we all know. But it also wrecked the British economy for decades. And Britain didn't pay off its World War II debt until the 21st century. I think like the first, like 2005 or 2006, something like that. And it was a hardship because when you create all this spending, you're being lent that money by central banks. Essentially, central banks will buy up your debt, and you've got to pay it off. And that means successive generations of the UK had to pay off that debt. And they were, in the early years, it was really hard on them because their economic growth wasn't all that great. But Britain eventually got to a point where their economy grew enough and they were able to pay off the debt. And it wasn't, toward the end, it wasn't the most onerous thing in the world, and they were able to do it. But what we're doing now is vastly worse. Vastly, vastly worse. So anytime you have debt, basically what you're saying is that your children and your grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to pay off the money that you're spending now. And so what that means is it will slow down economic growth for your descendants. And your only hope is that somehow they'll generate even much, much greater economic growth to offset that and hopefully make the debt that you're creating seem like no big deal. But that's the wish and a prayer. And where we're at right now is we probably have sabotaged all of those future generations for the conceivable future, because when you create that much debt, you're actually going to hamper economic growth, and I don't think they're going to be able to do it. But we're now at a point where even that's not the issue. We're at a point now where all the debt that's being created is, at least in the opinions of those financial experts that I have been reading, very likely to just tank the dollar altogether. And the only thing potentially saving the dollar is the fact that other international currencies are also dealing with, oh, my phone just did some kind of crazy thing there, are also, let's turn that off, in trouble as well. So the dollar vis-a-vis other currencies is still relatively strong, but I don't think that we're going to be out of the woods here. And a nation like China, which has trillions and trillions of US dollars that is just holding, there's really, they could get to a point where they just dump their dollars on the market, and those dollars will come back to the US, and you're going to deal with hyperinflation. And right now, we're now seeing the point where even the global banksters who are running the central banks, like, you're getting statements increasingly where they're saying, well, yeah, it looks like we're going to have some inflation. We could be at a point where the bottom falls out. So if the bottom falls out of the US dollar, and if you're living in the United States, you're an American citizen, you have to use the US economy to survive, that is the crisis I'm talking about. Not this torching of American cities. Yeah, that's bad. That's scary. And I wish that weren't happening. But the collapse of this bubble system that we are in, that is the crisis. And so if that were to happen, now we ask ourselves, what is going to be the repercussions of that crisis? Well, I've got a pretty damn good idea. Global, or certainly martial law within the United States, is absolutely on the table. Because there's going to be a lot of really, really unhappy people. Now, if you've got martial law, but still a lot of unhappy people, and those unhappy people increasingly are armed with, like the protesters nowadays, like the Antifa protesters are coming out with body armor and guns and helmets and shields. They are now becoming as well armed and protected as police departments are. This is the latest development here. So if you have martial law with a whole group of heavily armed, angry, violent people on the other side, well, I've got no idea in hell how that's going to turn out. So that's going to be, that's revolution. That's a revolutionary situation. And ask yourself this, and I'm being totally serious here. How impossible would it be for an armed insurrection in Washington, D.C. to occur? And how impossible would literally a French Revolution style mob to move in on D.C.? You think it's impossible? Well, Louis XVI also thought it was impossible. Of course, he wasn't very smart. But the next thing he knew is that he was under the control of the mob, for a number of years until they did him in. Right now, what we have in the U.S. is a revolution in search of a person to lead it. Like, there really isn't one. But that person will present themselves very potentially. Anyway, I'm just kind of like spitballing here and like looking at scenarios as they may turn out. But in terms of a UFO disclosure, I don't see it happening, because not that it's impossible that UFO data won't come out. UFO data might come out in the course of all of this craziness. But I think very potentially that it will be so far down the list of priorities that it will actually get lost in the shuffle, which is an amazing thing to think about, because I think that all of us, even 5-6 years ago, would have assumed that any kind of real opening of the UFO cover-up would be a revolutionary thing in itself. I certainly thought that. When Bryce Zabel and I wrote AD After Disclosure, that was our absolute governing assumption, that opening up the UFO reality was itself a revolutionary act. And I think 10 years ago, it would have been. That would have been a revolutionary act. 5 years ago, it would have been. Now I don't know, because now we have shifted as a society into a position where this has gone beyond UFOs, because now we're in a matter of actual survival, because we have completely, like, as a society, committed economic seppuku. We've just like shoved the knife into ourselves. And I'm talking about the lockdowns, and I'm talking about the trillions in spending. This was absolute economic civilizational suicide. And we just everyone just like traipsed into this almost willingly. By the way, one of the key spokespersons just today, I just read, of the WHO, the World Health Organization, they have reversed their position on lockdowns, just in case you're wondering. And I don't know if they've done this officially or if their leading spokesperson has done this on his own, but has stated that we really don't believe that the lockdowns are productive at this point. It's like, whoa. Well, is that going to be buried by Twitter now? I'm just waiting. Is Twitter just going to bury that like they buried all the other stuff? Point, though, is that we have completely obliterated our global economy. It's wrecked. It's gone. I think the latest numbers that like 60% of all the businesses that have gone under lockdown are not going to come back. You're talking like about 100,000 separate enterprises in the United States alone that are not going to come back. That's a body blow that I don't think, I don't see how an economy is going to be able to come back from that. So it's done, and you're going to see major corporations just swoop in, and they're just going to And by the way, they're the ones who got most of the bailout money in this last year. It's all most gone to central banks and major banks. A little bit now is going to the people, but like with Eisenhower's farewell speech, too little, too late. It's not going to make a difference. So the crises that we're dealing with is so much greater, at least in the immediate term, than even unpacking the UFO reality. And that's a horrible tragedy, because when you go back to the UFO reality, we are dealing with something that is so deep, so powerful, so potent in its implications for everything that we're doing here. And the agenda, let's say agendas plural, because I think there are multiple agendas here, but at least one of those agendas is one that we really ought to be concerned about, because this probably, and I know there's a few of you out there who are chomping at the bit right now, but probably involves some level of significant infiltration of our society. I've come to believe that. And the real question is, what is that agenda? Okay. And in case you're wondering, I don't have a full, completed thesis on this. Some of you do. And maybe, I'm just going a little slowly here. But I do have some hypotheses, and the hypotheses, at least one of them, is not pretty. And that hypothesis is collusion at the highest levels of our power structure with at least one of these groups. Hell, I mean, if you take even some of the stories of abductees who will talk about reptilian beings in collaboration with military types, like U.S. military types, that in itself could tell you there's something going on here. Now, does that mean, who's got what agenda here? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? It is a potential situation where you're dealing with an infiltration of our structure of power that maybe they're manipulating the global situation to get this crisis, to get what they want. That's entirely possible. The only thing I have to say is, I don't know for sure that that's the case, but let's say it looks like that could be the case. One thing that is definitely the case is that there is a human elite that clearly is using this current global crisis, the COVID crisis, to create to basically screw down a global totalitarian system. I don't think that we can argue this anymore. This is clearly happening. That is to create implement 5G 24/7 surveillance of everyone and everything. Now, that system is not going to be complete for probably at least 5 years globally. All right. Now, all of the 5G predictions, for example, are that even by 2023, 2024, it's not going to be comprehensive globally. All right. In many regions of the world, 5G will still not be fully implemented, even in 5 years from now. But in the US, in China, in Europe, yeah, it's very much going to be dominant over the next 5 years or so, most likely. So that, and that matters because that means smart devices throughout your home, maybe inside your body, like literally in your body in the form of implants, all these different smart devices that are extracting data, massive amounts of data. And with 5G implemented, it will then be possible for all of those data streams to be processed by ultra efficient AI algorithms that are going to be able to chew up all that data and to be able to do things with that data that even now in 2020 are probably not possible, but with greater abilities for these algorithms to be able to process the data streams that are coming in. And of course, all of that's going to implement and enable an AI breakthrough, because the main thing that you require to get very strong AI is data. And with a sufficient amount of data, think of the learning algorithms to like the Go champion of the world, or at least China's Go champion, who was defeated by, I think was that a Google algorithm, Google AI, which was a learning algorithm. This was a program that just started to learn Go and very quickly was able to learn to defeat the greatest, or one of the very greatest Go players in the world in a very short period of time. That's the kind of learning algorithms we're talking about. And algorithms like that require data. And 5G is the mechanism by which they are going to get that data. And so we're looking now at a point where, certainly within a decade, there's going to be a very overt, obvious level of control that will be owned by the largest tech corporations in the world in collusion with national governments around the world. We're seeing it already, with Facebook and Google working hand in glove with the deeper elements of the U.S. state. All right. Not Donald Trump, obviously. I'm talking behind him and in opposition to him to at least a large extent. You've got these tech companies, and they're going to own the algorithms that are going to be controlling literally every aspect of our lives. And this is going to be much more important, because if the dollar does go poof, which, look, guys, I'm sorry to say this, but I think that's going to happen. And even if that doesn't happen, you have economic catastrophe now, where we've just destroyed a huge portion of what was once the free middle class. And the COVID lockdowns have done that. That's not coming back. I don't see any circumstance in which that can come back. Now, maybe that's a limitation of my own imagination, because I can't foresee future possibilities here that, well, you can't see what you can't see. But there's nothing to make me think that that's going to change. What we're looking at is a corporate elite control over a greater part of the economy. All those middle class industries and businesses, rather, that have gone away, they're just going to get gobbled up by, like, the retailers. They're going to be replaced by Amazon. That's obvious. And even like simple things like the movie theater industry, like, that's been destroyed. That's done. It's not coming back. Everything's now streaming. So you've got Amazon and Netflix and Hulu, and who the hell owns Hulu? I don't remember. They're all being owned. They're all just owned by a couple of corporations. That's it. So anyway, we're looking at a complete destruction of the old economy. There's not any new normal. The new normal is simply centralized totalitarianism. That's it. That's the new normal. So get used to it. And in that situation, going back to UFO disclosure, how is that going to happen? How is there going to be a UFO disclosure coming out of this crisis? The only possible way that it will come out is in the confusion, in the crisis, a heroic whistleblower, like a Snowden type, another Snowden basically, is going to go in and rip out this digital information and throw it out there for the world. But ask yourself how likely that is. Look at the absolutely criminal, shameful treatment right now that the U.S. is pushing against Julian Assange right now, and the U.K. can't let them off the hook. U.S. and U.K. in tandem are making an example of that man right now. And by the way, where's the mainstream liberal media to defend this man? They're gone. There is, to my observation, one media organization that is consistently defending Assange, and that's the evil RT. That they're the only ones. I mean, a couple of other independent voices. Okay, fine. The Western media, they're letting him out to hang, out to dry. All right. So there's no one defending him. And so my point is that in this environment, who the hell is going to be the brave whistleblower that's going to take it on themselves to open up the UFO secrets that we all desperately need to have opened up? Well, I don't see it happening. And by the way, I don't see it happening with the Democratic administration, and I don't see it happening with Trump if he gets reelected. I don't see him doing it. I mean, if that were a desire of Donald Trump, you would think he wouldn't have this vendetta to go after Assange. And why the hell would he have such an vendetta, by the way? You know, when he was running as a candidate in 2016, he was actually very sympathetic to Julian Assange. But what we now know is he wanted to make a deal with Assange and basically have Assange give up the identity of the people who were leaking all the Hillary email stuff. Yeah, and that's actually that's a significant issue. But Assange wasn't willing to do it, and Trump's basically gave a big FU to Assange. Apparently, he's like, okay, fine, you want to play ball with me, I won't play ball with you, and he's either just being personally vindictive, or what actually strikes me as more realistic, even for Trump, is that there's just deep state pressure to go after Assange because they just want to take him down. And Trump clearly, this is where the Q narrative really falls apart with me, because I don't see him playing 4D chess against the deep state. I would love for that to be the case. I would love nothing more than for the Q analysis to be true, because I would love to see that whole deep state cabal being taken down, because I think there is a deep state cabal, and I would love for it to be exposed. But I don't think Trump's the guy to do it. And if he's not the guy to do it, there's literally no political figure on the horizon that's going to do it. So give up that little fantasy. So Trump's not going to do this whole UFO disclosure thing. I just don't see it. And I mean, all I have to do is look at his treatment of Assange. So I think that gives us a very clear idea. Maybe he's playing 5 or 6D chess. Maybe. That's a nice little fantasy to entertain. I just don't believe it. So I guess what I'm going to get close to wrapping this up here. Wow, I've been going for almost 75 minutes here. We're definitely moving toward a major crisis here. But the real question is, what direction is that crisis going to take us? And my sense and my fear are that it's going to take us into a very, very significant new normal, which goes by an old name. And the old name is totalitarianism. And I think that's going to happen because we're going to very possibly come to a significant economic catastrophic situation, which is being brought about by the complete hollowing out and destruction of the global economy right now that's going on. The crisis that we're looking at for the upcoming election, I'm sorry, guys, but I think that's just small potatoes compared with what we're going to be looking at in the aftermath of that. It's really a crazy thing. Our society, I'm thinking of US right now, but also a lot of the Western world, has gotten so worked up, but they're worked up over subsidiary issues. They're getting worked up over basically the left hates the right and the right hates the left. And basically the ship is just sinking. while everyone's got their hands around each other's throats over culture issues. I mean, a lot of it is cultural issues. I mean, I'm just sorry, but that's really what it is. And they just hate each other. And meanwhile, the ship is going down in the middle of the ocean. And when that happens, that's going to precipitate a crisis that I don't know where we're going to come out with that one. Somehow something's going to come out on the other end, but what is that society going to be? It looks like we're not creating economic infrastructure. Well, China is. The U.S. basically, sorry I have to say this, but pissed away its opportunity to do that over the last 20 years. So we don't have an economic infrastructure that's really going to be worth anything. We're creating a global totalitarian infrastructure. That's the infrastructure that's being created. And so that's an infrastructure I think that will likely be implemented. And in that kind of a context, how do you get UFO disclosure? That's the question. How do you do it? And I'm not seeing a solution to that problem. And this is why all of the forward motion we've had over the last 3 years, yes, that is a good thing. But it's the babyest of baby steps. And is that a word, babyest? It's the babyest of baby steps. Like, as I was saying in my analogy, maybe we've cleared off the front steps to the mansion. We still haven't even gotten in the door. We got to get through the porch to the front door. And then when we're in the front door, it's like, holy crap, what a god-awful mess. So, and then, if I want to continue this analogy, maybe the mansion is just going to be subject to arson and everything that's inside there is just going to be gone anyway. That might be the case. Yeah, sorry, this seems a little pessimistic. This is where my analysis is taking me. So what I would love to know are your thoughts. And in the context of our nice, secure website here, your thoughts will be secure. And, the people who are going to see it are other members of the site. So I'd be interested in what you have to think about this. I genuinely would like to know. For all of that, it seems all depressing, I know. But I take a longer view of this, and we are part of a long history of humanity that, as I've said this many, many times, we have dealt with crises in the past. People have dealt with even worse than what we're dealing with now. What could be worse, you ask? Well, read some history. And there have been crises and catastrophes that have been worse. So I think that in the very long view, beyond my lifetime, certainly, there may be resolutions to this that I can't imagine right now, that actually can create a more reasonable version of what a civilization can become. I think it's possible. I don't see it yet, but I realize my vision only goes so far, as with all of us. So I guess what I'm saying is I have faith that the human spirit is not dead, and I have faith that we as a civilization and as a species can still find a way to make a bad situation better. I do. I believe that. Crazy. Maybe that itself is an act of faith and it's an act of will, but be that as it may, that's what I believe. I'm going to come back with some more thoughts soon, I'm sure. And I'm glad that we were able to have this time together. And I definitely, the last thing I'm going to say here is we can't let ourselves get too discouraged, no matter how difficult the situation looks. One solace could be that we are living through some of the most interesting, literally some of the most interesting times that any human being has ever experienced. And we have front row seats because we don't have front row seats. We're on the stage and we're in the middle of it and we're living it. So let's use that to increase our own wisdom and our own perspective on the situation. Maybe that's the best thing we can do, and pass some of that wisdom that we learn on to other people around us. How about that? With that, I'm going to wish you all a good night, and I'll definitely look forward to being with you again the next time.